Join us as we embark on the extraordinary journey along the winding road to Station Cottage in Altnabreac, where each twist and turn unveils a story, drawn from first-hand witness accounts and the evidence that remains. In the previous 7 parts, we meticulously traced a disturbing trail: the misappropriation of David Howe's estate in the Republic of Ireland, the illicit funds used to purchase Station Cottage, Altnabreac in Scotland, and the central figures orchestrating this elaborate scheme, Elizabeth Howe and Ian Thomas Appleby. The tragic consequence? The theft of rightful inheritances from David Howe's own children. The evidence strongly suggests deliberate, calculated deception. But the core question remains: how did Elizabeth Howe, a woman who was legally obligated to act in the best interests of the estate, manage to entirely circumvent the law and seize it for herself? How did she manage to seize what was legally owed to her own siblings? Let's delve into the intricacies of her cunning plan, where the details become damning. The key to unlocking this act of brazen larceny lies in the Succession Act 1965 in the Republic of Ireland, the cornerstone of Irish inheritance law, and its application, or rather, its misapplication, in this specific case. Crucially, the process begins with what is known as letters of administration. Issued by the Kilkenny Probate Office, these legal documents are the official mandate for administering an intestate estate, that is, an estate where the deceased did not leave a valid will. The Succession Act 1965 is the bedrock of inheritance law in the Republic of Ireland. It provides a detailed framework for the distribution of a deceased person's assets when no valid will exists. The Act is meticulously designed to ensure fairness and legal certainty. It dictates a hierarchy of beneficiaries, designed to reflect the deceased's presumed wishes and family relationships. The intent is to protect the interests of those closest to the deceased. The Act lays out the following crucial provisions, the fundamental rules of intestate succession. Firstly, the Act prioritizes the surviving spouse. If there is a spouse, they are entitled to a significant share of the estate, typically 2/3. Secondly, after the spouse's share is determined, or if there is no surviving spouse, the remainder of the estate is divided amongst the deceased's children, in equal shares. Thirdly, if any child has predeceased the deceased, the child's share will pass to their own children, the grandchildren of the deceased, again, in equal shares. These are the basic, inviolable tenets of inheritance when there is no will. The Act is not open to interpretation. It is a matter of following a legal process. In David Howe's case, and this is where the fraudulent manipulation began, he died without a will, and he had no surviving spouse. This immediately triggered the second scenario outlined by the Act: the entire estate, in its entirety, was to be divided equally among his children. Each child was entitled to receive an equal portion of the estate's assets. The law could not be clearer. The process to administer an intestate estate necessitates that someone apply to the probate office to be granted the letters of administration. This individual, called the grantee or executor, takes on the legal responsibility of identifying the deceased's assets, paying any outstanding debts and taxes, and finally, distributing the remaining assets to the rightful beneficiaries. The probate office relies on the information provided by the applicant, who is obligated to act with transparency, honesty, and in accordance with the law. This is where the deception took root. Elizabeth Howe submitted a sworn testimony to the Kilkenny Probate Office, acting as the grantee of the estate. This testimony, however, was a tapestry of distortions. Elizabeth Howe built a structure of falsehoods, each brick carefully laid to conceal her scheme. She set out to become the sole beneficiary, effectively disinheriting her siblings. Her plot was designed to remove her siblings from the equation and to manipulate the probate office and, by extension, the law. The heart of her deception lay in the manufactured existence of David Howe's ex-wife, Wendy. Though divorced from David Howe over 30 years prior, Elizabeth claimed that Wendy held some sort of claim over a portion of the estate. This claim was entirely fabricated, intended to distort the natural inheritance. Elizabeth then produced a document, a forged letter bearing a fake signature, supposedly from Wendy. This forged letter stated that Wendy, who it falsely claimed was living at a location called Ballybannon-Uncovered, Carlow in the county of Carlow at the time of David's death, was purportedly renouncing her rights to 2/3 of the estate. This document was entirely fraudulent. Solidify her false narrative and subtly influence the probate office, Elizabeth made a crucial misrepresentation about her own status. She declared herself as the former police detective, the lawful daughter. This wasn't a simple statement of fact, it was a carefully crafted statement designed to mislead. The title of former police detective invoked an image of a trustworthy, law-abiding citizen, a person beyond suspicion. This was a blatant attempt to cultivate an aura of credibility, ensuring the probate office would accept her claims at face value. This subtle manipulation of perception was essential to the deception, and the probate office believed her. The inclusion of the police title was designed to mask her own past, a bent former detective. The Kilkenny probate office, relying on the good faith of the applicant and operating with limited resources for independent investigation, had no reason to question the veracity of Elizabeth's submissions. Armed with these fraudulent documents and her carefully constructed narrative, Elizabeth and Dean Thomas Appleby secured the letters of administration. The true value of the David Howe estate was significantly in excess of that declared. These letters were the legal instruments used for money laundering. This passport of deceit was then presented to Ian Thomas Appleby's solicitors in Inverness, Scotland, during the due diligence checks required to proceed with the purchase of Station Cottage. The solicitors, unaware of the underlying fraud, accepted the documentation at face value. They unknowingly facilitated the transfer of the stolen funds. Furthermore, an additional £15,000 inexplicably emerged from the cashing in of David Howe's premium bonds. The details were, and remain, opaque. The total amount of the stolen assets remains unknown, yet this completed the purchase of Station Cottage. With such a complex web of lies, it's clear that the true value of David Howe's estate was significantly higher than the €167,525 figure declared by Howe and Appleby. Remember, there were assets such as the proceeds from the sale of David's home that were never declared. The full extent of their ill-gotten gains is known only to them. There is every reason to believe the actual value was substantially understated. This leads us to the potential legal consequences of Elizabeth's actions, particularly concerning the Criminal Justice, Theft, Fraud and Offences, Act 2001 in the Republic of Ireland. Her actions could bring significant legal repercussions, and ultimately, she could be forced to pay for the harm she inflicted. Section 11 of the Criminal Justice, Theft, Fraud and Offences, Act 2001 specifically addresses the offence of fraud by deception. This section is the critical piece of Irish law in this case. This section states that a person commits fraud where they act with the intention of making a gain for themselves or another or causing loss to another, and by deception dishonestly induce another to do any act. The deception is a critical element. This means making a false or misleading representation to another person. It could also mean knowingly failing to disclose information, or abuse of a position. This isn't merely a question of a familial dispute over inheritance, it's a potential criminal matter. The potential charges, under Section 11, could lead to serious legal consequences, including significant prison time, if convicted. The prosecution would need to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that she engaged in fraudulent activity and did so with intent. The evidence, however, speaks for itself. In Elizabeth Howe's case, the evidence is compelling. Her numerous false representations to the Kilkenny Probate Office meet the requirements of fraud. The forged letter, the deceptive statement of her own position, and the deliberate concealment of her siblings' rightful inheritance all constitute deceptive acts. These actions induced the Probate Office to issue the letters of administration under false pretenses, which in turn allowed the transfer of assets. She took advantage of her position. Her intent was to gain financially. Thank you for watching.